You ready? Spot. Go. So, let me set your mind straight. This ain't your type of music, cause this right here is my take. Set the canvas up, paint your mindscape. We're listening to colors, now that's what I call a mind game. Oh hi dame, tell me is you high lame? Smiling in my face to talk about me like that's not my name. Well, I guess I shouldn't mind then. Real is the only thing pumping through my veins now. Well, since we done with introductions, I'ma bring this heat, cause musical convection of brolic is this beat. I cooked it up like I'm a method runner, knocking heads to feet. You know about me, I'm not up and coming. Yeah, I know I'm on to something. I know I'm on to something. First I set the scene, look around, make sure my wallet bumping. You know I'm eating good, never had a message, so you know I'm not misunderstood. What is going on, y'all? What is going on? It's your boy DameSmiff. It's your boy. And so this morning, we're going to start off the week talking about the children, the little ones, the children, the young musicians, the little proteges and superstars that we see starting off in school, starting off in college, and in a kind of cosmic way, also you older musicians who may just be getting started with your music career, right? And so this is Musician Talks with DameSmiff, and if you guys enjoy conversations like this, make sure you hit the like button, because that will show people that this video is really, really cool and allow other people to find this information. And also hit the subscribe button so you can see my latest videos. So when I talk about this week's topic, and I mean by like the children of musicians or child musicians, basically, what I really mean is that, like, how do we create a musician? How do we design and quote unquote manufacture an artist today? And when we think about the story we covered of Jermaine Dupri and how he discovered crisscross, it kind of begs the question of, well, is there a structure? Is there a plan? Is there an expectation to how you raise a musician from child age, right? And for myself, I never thought of it that way, because being a musician, you just think it's just like a part of life. Like, you just kind of like, oh, when I hear music, I love music. When I create music, I love music. But you never think of it as like, what am I really doing for others as far as what I represent, what I choose to be, and what I choose to say through this medium we call music, right? And so throughout the week, that's going to be the theme. This entire week, we're going to be discussing how to navigate the child's perspective of being a musician. And this can kind of bleed into a lot of different things as far as what it's like being a child, whether it's from America or just in the world in general. But it's also going to bleed into things about like how we view children. And so it's going to be very, very interesting and like layered and stuff. I'm gonna learn a lot. I'm gonna try to teach you guys a lot. And so as we explore this, this is going to help shape the way we look at young musicians. But going forward, it should also shape how we view musicians as a whole when we consider how they began, right? And so today we're going to react to a few different topics, and a lot of them are going to be from just a foundational understanding of like children, just like what are they, what do they do, what do they think, right? And then we're going to relate it to musicianship as well as entertainment and understanding like, well, how are children even utilized or exploited in the entertainment industry? And then we'll also get a better understanding of the word exploitation as well. So let's get into our first clip. I don't want to hold you guys because we're going to get right into business, and we're going to make sure you guys get off to a good lunch today. So let's get in.
Today we're tackling a big question, one that affects thousands of young musicians every single year. Is it actually worth it to attend a top music university or conservatory? Schools like Juilliard, the Manhattan School of Music, Eastman carry enormous prestige, incredible talent, and let's be honest, enormous price tags. So let's dig into the reality of what music school costs today, and what you're really paying for, and whether it's a financially wise path for aspiring musicians.
So how many of you, especially you guys in the chat, what's up chat? What's going on, y'all? How you guys feeling? What's happening? Boom bang bing, you know. But how many of you, if you knew you could be Prince, you had the opportunity to be Prince, how many of you would pay for the education that Prince had or the training that Prince had? And if you would, how much would you be willing to pay? Let me know. Put it in the chat. Because the thing that we're going to be discussing a lot of this is going to be a little bit of like parenting a young musician. But even as a musician, you'll hear a lot of them say, well, I never really learned to read music. I never really studied music. I never went to school for music and stuff like that. And considering that, how valuable do you think you would be if you actually paid for laser focused training on music, right? Someone says $100,000. That's mind blowing to me because that's a huge number. But now when you're considering whatever number you come up with, right? 100,000, 60,000, 70,000, what do you expect to get in return, right? Because if you were to compare $100,000 training in, let's say, healthcare, what do you expect to get in return? And then when you think of $100,000 in, let's say, civil engineering or real estate architecture training, you know, what kind of expectations do you expect to get from the industry, right? What kind of job opportunities? But then when we think about music, there are a lot of things that we, at least culturally, we don't assign to the formal education of music, right? When we think about, let's say, Michael Jackson, how many of you know what school he went to? And how many of you recommend that school to other musicians? When we think of, let's say, Taylor Swift, what about her school? You know, and things like that. And it's not that it doesn't happen. Usually people that know this information are definitely trying to be a part of the industry and getting involved in the music industry. But as far as it being like a primary prerequisite for what we consider a talented musician, similar to like a doctor or a therapist or a fitness coach, like being certified as a fitness coach, it kind of separates a little bit of who you consider professional or not, right? And so just keep that in mind, the number you have in your head, and then consider what you expect to get in return for that number.
Let's start with the numbers. At many top conservatories, tuition alone is now over $60,000 per year.
Thank you, Chad. But this number that he said, $60,000 here, it basically shows us that that's a big chunk of change, right? That could be like a really nice car to, you know, a huge double mortgage payment or something like that, right? The point here is that if you were to pay that money though, what do you expect to get in return, right? And this trope that I have in my head, and I usually use it a lot of times, is that, and again, you may not have experienced this trope, you may not have even believed this is real, but for me, it's the musician who went to school for music who is now busking in the subway, right? When you consider, let's say, a doctorate, right? Like a medical doctorate, how many of you think like you will be like out in the field just doing medical work? Like you'll just be in like a, you know, a terrible accident somewhere and just be digging your hands in somebody's like injuries trying to help them? Or do you think it will be in a controlled environment, facility and resources provided to you in the state and government and things like that? Like how structured of an occupation do you think you'll get? Because on the other hand, if you consider, let's say, a business degree, you essentially will be in the field. It will be a eat what you kill kind of business. It'll be a numbers game. It will be, you'll have to abide by a lot more regulations and rules than somebody who would be employed, right? So what are we really looking at when we say we want to spend what he said was $60,000 on essentially elite training for musicianship?
Once you add housing, food, and basic living expenses, the total cost of attendance can exceed $90,000 annually. That means
So that actually means you were about right, $100,000 annually. So like you said, once you consider everything else, so that means like if your lifestyle means like I'll give you an example. If you want to go to Berkeley in Boston, but you live down south, then you would have to pay for housing and out of state fees and all that other stuff. And then, of course, lifestyle stuff like food and travel. Maybe you got gigs and stuff you got to go to. Maybe you're a part of other organizations that cost you dues and stuff like that. And, then you're going to have to work and then actually, pay for all of this stuff out of pocket. So, yeah, $100,000 actually runs it right around where you would be looking at for an elite education for musicianship.
a 4-year undergraduate degree can cost more than $360,000. Add a master's degree, and you're looking at over $500,000, assuming no scholarships. To put that in perspective, when I attended the Manhattan School of Music in the year 2000 for my master's degree, tuition was around $18,000. Today, it's closer to $58,000.
And that's pretty crazy. Like I talked to some musicians today and they still have like, student loans and stuff like that. And they're working really, really hard. But it's like most people who have student loans where it's like, man, how can I make this make sense today? How can I really make this not so much worth it, but make it like not such a burden on what it is I'm trying to do, right? So let's look at these numbers here. So 2024 to 2025, the tuition fees were about 57,000 and it went up about another 2,000 when we got to 2026 and 2025. Room and board stayed about the same, about a $500 increase. Now that can eat up too, right? I could see that by like 2030 looking like $21,000 for room and board. And then you got to think too, it's a tough thing. Like school in general, the way we fund schools, now that I've gone through American schooling and can say this, there's a big push for like convenience and technology that doesn't really serve education more so. So like when you think of room and board, this is probably around like a lot of cultural conveniences like Wi-Fi, central conditioning and stuff like that. Obviously security, technology, rings and stuff like that, ring cameras, campus security and all that other stuff. Like it all goes in hand, but it's like eventually you'll be building a city before you'll be building a school, right? And it just costs. It's not that you should or should not have it. It's just that is a part of why it is so expensive, right? So then going down to that, they tried to separate here technology, books, and supplies, and then that's a measly 1,500, right? And that's the point I'm trying to make here is like this 1,500. Just think that doesn't go into like the security cameras, the networks, the people who hired to watch the security cameras, and the resources and all that stuff. The technology they're talking about is like attendance software, homework software, group chat software. They're talking about that kind of tech. But I promise you, room and board involves a lot of this technology too. Miscellaneous, I'm not sure what that could be. That could probably be like food and stuff like that. Transportation, about 1,600. Now that is dependent on your culture, right? Some people don't believe in relying on public transportation, but your biggest detriment when it comes to being a student is travel. That's going to be the biggest thing. So if you can localize your education to where like if you can find if you're lucky enough at least to find a campus that has a city campus, city style campus where everything's like walking distance or like biking or bus distance, whoo, you'll save a lot of money. But if you're in a place that's like my school that I went to, where it was like just roads everywhere, leading everywhere, it was like if you didn't have a car, you were damn near stranded, right? If you didn't have like a bus or like a person with a car that you can pay gas money to, you were pretty much stuck. So there's that. And then health insurance, of course, it's up to whatever your individual situation is. And then that comes right around. It says 84,000, but I would just go ahead and round that up. You just call that about $100,000, right? And so again, this is just to get the education. This is just to get you into saying you know and you are a certified musician, right? So that's why a lot of people avoid this. Paying this money, you kind of think about like, okay, well, how much is this really going to dive into me learning this piece or working on this album and stuff like that? And rarely do you see musicians making this decision, let's say once they're in the industry. They're not like, oh, I'm gonna go back to school now that I can afford it. They usually figure that, all right, if I can master business, I can master everything else. But when you're considering a child or a young musician, how do we validate this number? How do we validate the price of this education and consider that we're getting what we are asking for when it comes to, let's say, the value of a music degree, right?
At Eastman, where Renee Fleming earned her master's degree, tuition at the time was around $7,000 per year, less than $10,000 including room and board.
Wow.
Adjusted for inflation, that would be roughly $29,000 today. But the actual cost to attend Eastman for the 2025-26 year is over $91,000.
Okay. And again, a lot of what this comes down to, honestly, I think is more so um the lifestyle creep that we all have. This weird thing that we have going on where we just want more and more and more and more and more. And it's not a bad thing. It's just, think about it. Like, tuition is 69K. So if you're paying for 69K, because I'm looking at this from a numbers perspective, but this is how a lot of parents look at this for their children, right? They're like, okay, if I do this, what do you become of this, right? Do you become a school teacher? Do you become a band member? Do you become a band leader? Do you become a record label executive? What is it that you're going to be getting, right? Do you become a singer, songwriter that can, have a sustaining career, like, let's say, a HVAC technician that starts their own business or something, or maybe you're a mechanic that opens their own auto shop and you're doing well in your state or something like that. Like, how do we really know what this is, right? And so when we're looking at the tuition, that's the educational part. That's all the teachers, all the arithmetic and the math and the history and all that cool stuff, right? Boom, $69,000. That's where my head went when we heard that number, but chat was saying about 100,000. But the reason that was because they were looking at everything else, right? So then you have housing, which is another $12,000. So that's probably like rent, so like $1,000 a month, pretty much. Food, $8,000. That's a lot of food. So then you have food, and I don't know if food covers like the meal plan that you get for most colleges and stuff these days. But that'd be pretty cool. If you get a meal plan for your education, that's always cool. Orientation first year program fee is 400. Activity fee 400. I don't even know what activity fee means. Does that mean like you join the marching band? It costs $400 for like the uniform and spats or something like that? I don't know. Comprehensive fee, mandatory health fee, just to cover anything that you need on campus and stuff like that. And it comes down to $91,000, 600 or 91,684, right? The issue, like I said, for most parents is going to be justifying this price, right? And now you're trying to make sense of like, well, what do I actually get in music education? So let me know in the chat. What do you think let's say this is University of Rochester School of Music. Let me look this up real quick. Actually, let me do it this way because this is actually kind of cool. But what do you think, chat? Let me know that your child would be expected to learn after you paid $91,000. What do you think it is that they should be coming out of that school with as far as validation? Like, of course, you're going to get the degree or the certificate or whatever it is. But what is it that you as a parent would be like, oh, okay, legit, this is what I understand you to have learned and to validate what I think a musician or artist is these days. But it says the Eastman School of Music at the University of Rochester is widely regarded as one of the most prestigious and selective music conservatories in the world, located in downtown Rochester, New York. It has a storied history and a massive influence on music education, performance, and composition. So I grew up in upstate New York, and a lot of the music I got my hands on was like a lot of jazz, right? And so things like that. A lot of like singing and. So when we consider like what we're getting access to. I don't think a lot of the music that the University of Rochester Eastman School of Music would have provided was easily accessible at the time for somebody like me. Like I was probably fourth, fifth grade when I was up there, second and third and stuff like that. So it was really down to like what the school curriculum had statewide. And again, when you're at that level of schooling, to be laser focused for musicianship is a decision. Like it's very, very niche, right? For most people, you're getting a general education at that point. You're just in public school. But to get such a specific niche kind of education about music at that point, it's very, very particular. But this school was founded in 1921 by industrialist and philanthropist George Eastman, and he's also the founder of Eastman Kodak Company. The school was established as the first professional school of the University of Rochester. Eastman envisioned a place that would not only train world-class musicians, but also enrich the cultural life of the broader community. And that's why I talk here about you guys having a role in society, right? And how we shape and design our music. But let's backtrack for a second. Let me know, chat. Type it in the chat. What do you guys think is a world-class musician? How do you train a world-class musician? How do you define that today? And what makes you kind of like notice a world-class musician? Like what makes you kind of like say, oh, I can tell you're world class, like a Michelin star or something like that, right? So let's continue watching the clip as you guys go ahead and let me know.
The actual cost to attend Eastman for the 2025-26 year is over $91,000. Juilliard is similar, with total costs approaching $89,000 per year. These numbers are staggering. Recently, Renee Fleming spoke very candidly about this issue.
Well, listen, given the climate right now for opera performance, classical music performance, which is what I know, I think there are far too many universities and colleges that are taking money from young people who shouldn't be. I mean, I'm sorry. And what's the thing that's, I think, criminal about that is that somebody recently said to me there should be an antitrust suit because these kids will all have debt. They'll all have terrible debt when they get out.
So this is a conversation that kind of transcends most industries. Like they say this about most colleges today. But the point here that I want to drive home is that like the expectation of musicians today, as we talked for the past like a month and a half or so, right? Do you see how the AI system is coming through? Do you see the royalty rate and how much you guys are paying musicians? And then also the fan expectation and demands of musicians as far as, well, you know how to play the instrument, but we want to know what your political views are. Do you see how we're designing artists today? And when I say, do you see that, are you observing literally the process? Like, not how do you explain for yourself the standards of a musician? Do you see what the standards of a musician is today? So they're paying about $100,000 for world-class training out of high school. So they got to get past the high school level first, right? And then qualify to be able to get into these schools. So they're already proficient in their instruments and music reading and stuff like that by the time they get there in order to get to these schools, right? At least that's what we sensibly hope. But by the time they get out, what is the expectation for them as far as the result of this training? Is there some kind of like job waiting for them? Is there some kind of like organization they're tapping into? Or is it still eat what you kill? And if that's the case, then how does it justify to charge people as much as they're charging? But also, if you are charging them that much, what is the expectations? Like, we have to be very clear on this.
Out of school, and I've given I don't do it anymore, but I have given master classes at small schools, and obviously there's a miraculous talent at some point, but if they don't get on the right track quickly, when they get to your late 20s, it's really a declining kind of possibility at that point. But, when I hear people that really have no business even majoring in voice, but the schools take them. I asked somebody at a major conservatory, how do you sleep at night? I know that was a bit harsh, but he said, well, you know what he said? He said, You know what? A lot of people use that degree to go on and then major in something else. Like, wow, that's given what secondary education costs, that's a bit rich, you know.
So, and then I also want you to consider this too. So, what this person is basically explaining is that there's a person who runs in a conservatory or works in a conservatory that use their degree to, kind of like level up to like another degree, which is essentially job hopping. They're trying to just, make more money at the end of the day. Again, nothing really, really wrong with it. It's just kind of like icky, right? It's kind of like, ugh, you're doing that to like people who want like to build careers and stuff like that, right? So the point here that I think that I pull out of this is, so if that's the case, right? If this is the understanding of how we are looking at young musicians today, then like she's saying, how many of these schools should be existing, right? What is the real point of having them exist? And I think the solution to this is honestly going to be, you have to bring back the things that don't matter when it comes to artistry and music, and then eliminate it. Like, for example, what is a stream, right? The concept of streaming shouldn't be designed, at least when it comes to music, solely by technology. It should be culturally driven, simply because this is something that has to be founded through artistry, right? And it sounds weird to say that because like I said, there's a real finite understanding on what a musician is. But for some reason, as we're going to continue to watch this, we're not going to be able to define what a musician is outside of the musicality that musicians bring, right? But everything outside of musicality is how we value musicians, right? So I'll give you one more example, then I'll let her continue. If you have a young musician that plays trumpet really, really well, and they can play, let's say, Amazing Grace, like a solo of Amazing Grace, like super, super nice, right? How important is it that they know that skill to their ability to compete with Kendrick Lamar today? And so when we have that conversation, it's really hard to justify to a lot of young musicians to pursue music through school. And then it also makes it really hard to justify the price of school when it comes to being a really good trumpet player and you have to compete with a Kendrick Lamar.
I think she's right. The job market for classical musicians, especially singers, is brutally competitive. Very few people land stable full time work right out of school. And student loan debt is not like other debt. It cannot be discharged through bankruptcy. You carry it for decades. Even if you're incredibly talented, disciplined, hardworking, there are no guarantees. I want to pause here and add something personal. I am deeply grateful for the support I had. I received generous scholarships and family support that allowed me to earn my bachelor's degree at Utah State University, my master's degree at the Manhattan School of Music, and my doctorate degree from Indiana University. Without that support, I would have thought very carefully before taking on that financial burden. I also began my undergraduate studies over 30 years ago, when tuition was dramatically lower. Students today are facing a completely different reality. Now let's talk about what you actually are paying for. At a conservatory, you usually receive one private lesson per week.
Okay. So he made a great point about like it doesn't matter how hard you work and how dedicated you are. And that's kind of the icky part about what we mean about the job hopping section, is that there's a lot of people who will put forth a lot of valuable talent and skill and time that they can't get back for a situation that's going to put them in debt or put them in a situation where they can't really make sense of the value of their degree or their training, right? Like I said, there's a lot of singers and buskers and things like that. Like we'll go to a park and you'll hear a band playing and it's like, how valuable is this time they're spending playing this gig versus the amount of money we know they spent to get the education it took for them to learn their musicality, right? And that's not the case from all musicians. Some musicians learn by ear or will, like, find cheaper routes. And like he said, he was lucky enough to have family support like some of us are. But the point here is that we need to figure out how to put a number to this if we want to justify something in the future, like let's say a streaming rate, or let's say a contract for your catalog and things like that. Like, we have to know how to value these things, right? And that's why it's really easy for teachers and professors to be like, well, I'm going to be able to experience my good side of getting a degree because I'm the teacher. But if you're trying to actually be a musician, not a teacher, it's a completely different conversation.
Around 32 lessons per year. If instead you paid a private teacher $100 per lesson and you took 6 lessons per week, Monday through Saturday, you would get around 313 lessons per year. That would cost around $31,300 per year. That's roughly 1/3 of the cost of many top conservatories, with about 9 times the individual instruction.
And you also got to remember the amount of, I guess you could say, students per class that are paying that $90,000 one lesson per week for these teachers and stuff like that, right? Like, I have a mentor now, and I could definitely do the private lessons thing. The only issue would be like time management. This mentor is like super busy, right? But if I had an institution that thought like this, like I said, if you reeled back all of the amenities and the cool demands that we have as like a lifestyle creep and really designed specifically a school of music where a person could do 6 lessons a week with a teacher. Now, you got to also think like the same process. Like, if you had group classes, 6 lessons a week, there's that thing. But combined with the price point here of $30,000, you also got to think about the lifestyle, right? This is not a thing where you're going to be like a part-time musician. 6 lessons a week, like, yeah, you are definitely of the craft by this point, right? And this is also something I think a lot of people don't really understand when they're trying to get young musicians into this. They want to treat, let's say, being a musician as kind of like an option. Like, a lot of them have scholarships for playing in music, but have a degree in biology or a degree in criminal law and things like that. And it's like it doesn't matter to the musicianship, to the society of musicians and the culture of musicianship, but it also puts you in the realm of musicians without the actual participation. Like, you're not planning on opening a studio, you're not planning on putting out a record, and you don't plan on really participating past the utility of playing music, right? And so what this then does is it creates a kind of culture of saying, well, this is an option for me to make money versus this is what I want to do, right? And that's what kind of devalues the degree a lot of times, where you'll have a situation of, we've heard it before, where we'll have people who join the military and they'll join it for like the muscle car and the free schooling. But then when it's time to defend the country, it's like, this is a weird, awkward conversation, right? And so that's what you'll then have. You'll have a situation where everybody's going to school to be in music and then say they're a producer and they want to get in the studios and make cool little beats and make songs. But when it's time to have this conversation about the children, I don't see it happening. I don't see it coming across the table. Like, it's the woman we seen on the panel here, and we have the gentleman here in this video having the conversation. It's not the general mainstream musician or the mainstream fan either.
And that doesn't even include the flexibility to add coachings, diction, or performance work tailored specifically to you.
And that's a huge part of what we've been talking about lately when we're talking about artists getting on stage and really understanding to read the room and stuff like that. Like, this coaching and diction and networking thing, you got to pay for that training too. Like, that's the section of my career that I'm in now. Like, I'm paying for understanding sales and networking and talking to people and like how to really make deals and move businesses and stuff, right? We've gone past making, beats and songs and notes and stuff. We can do that. Now we got to understand how to like actually affect your city and then affect policy.
Here's my honest take. If you want to be a professional musician, the top universities and conservatories offer amazing training. But the only way I would attend a top conservatory today is with a major scholarship or significant family financial support. Without that, the financial risk is enormous, especially in a field with limited job stability.
And so he's telling you out of his mouth the truth of the process, right? If you're not going to have really, really serious or like immense family support, those of us are lucky to have that, then it's really not as valuable to make this pursuit, right? So when he says that, he might go into it further. When he says that and you hear that, what do you learn? And this is what I talk about on this channel, you being able to see a problem and then learn from it, right? If he says that and you learn that, then how does that value an artist today? If you see an artist today and they're a musician, and let's say they got their business and their Instagram profile and they're doing good, but they did not get any formal training, how do you value that, knowing that if they didn't get a lot of support, it really wouldn't have been valuable to have received that training? How do you view them now? And it only is a question for you to answer because we're having a cultural conversation about musicians, right? But if you're having a business conversation about musicians, then it would seem to be that you would look as a more valuable musician to have gone to school for music at a point, right? And so when we say that, but then you go to school for music and you come out of it in debt, you come out of it in a situation where you're really not competing with those that are going to school. You're competing with everybody, right? People who are musicians that gone to school, people who are musicians that did not go to school, as well as people who went to school through music. Like they just happened to just play a piano well, but they really went to school on a scholarship for music, right? You competing with all of them, right? And so how do we now view these artists, and especially how do we then view the trajectory of, let's say, the child musicians coming up after us?
Do these schools offer incredible teachers, connections, and performance opportunities? Absolutely. But for most students, that doesn't justify $500,000 in debt. And it's important to say this clearly. You do not have to attend a top conservatory to become a great musician. Baritone Thomas Hampson earned his degree at a small college in Spokane, Washington. Mezzo-soprano Dolores Zajek studied at the University of Nevada, Reno. Luciano Pavarotti never attended a conservatory at all. He studied privately for 6 years. One of my own teachers, Neil Rosenshine, told me how he repeatedly tried to get into Juilliard, and then he finally got in, and then was later dismissed. After that, he drove a taxi and then used the money to study with as many teachers as he could, sometimes 10 at once, each believing that they were his only teacher. He later went on to sing at the Metropolitan Opera. The point is, it is not imperative to attend a top conservatory to become a successful musician. What truly matters is having an exceptional natural ability and working with excellent teachers and mentors who know how to train the voice. Some of the best teachers in the world do teach at major conservatories like Juilliard, the Manhattan School of Music, Eastman, Indiana, Cincinnati, NEC. But they are not the only places where great training exists. So is it worth it? Well, the answer is complicated. A career in music can be deeply meaningful and artistically fulfilling, but it is rarely financially secure in the early years. If you're going to take on debt that rivals a mortgage, you need to be absolutely certain it won't limit or break your future. If you can attend with major financial aid, that's wonderful. By all means, do that. If not, there are many other ways to train at a high level without risking your financial life. In a recent Times interview, Jonas Kaufmann stated, "I tell young musicians, only do it if you're burning for it. It's a 1 in 1,000 chance to make a living at it."
So when we consider this, how many of you are really thinking about getting into music? How many of you plan on, let's say, pursuing a executive career in music, right? Just, whether it's in the music industry or being an assistant to a musician, what are the odds of you getting success in it? Like, what is it in your mind, right? And when he says only do it if you are burning for it, it means exactly that. Like, there's a lot of musicians who will kind of like settle. They'll get comfortable. Like, they'll just, like I said, be the busker in the street. They won't really try to compete on a world scale. Just in general, like they just won't try to compete because they'll get comfortable, right? But when you say make a living, then that means that you're going to have to rely on the music. And most musicians don't want to do that, right? And especially if they didn't go to school through and for music, right? So if you're going to think about all of the things we just learned in that quick span of time, how would you then shape the mind of a young artist to then deal with this burden, right? Familial support is always a great thing, but it's really after they get out of school that's when the work starts. And that's kind of why the debt part is so controversial, because if my solution for it would have been, I think we should make the idea of music schools a little bit more focused. I think it should be focused on making artists the standalone independent businessmen and women we need them to be, right? We seem to have this idea that you are a musician if you understand music very thoroughly. But I think that's only like one part of the eight-sided die that they have to roll in life, right? Eventually, they're going to have to be good at music, but also know how to network, which is how you find your teachers, right? Because he was saying you want to find teachers and mentors that'll help you, right? But then at the same time, you'll have to be disciplined and have the character and to be able to withstand rejection and critique from these kinds of teachers on a high level consistently, 300 and something lessons. And then at the same time, you also have to manage just being a regular person. So if you want to get a girl pregnant, or if you want to be pregnant, or if you want to get a new car, or if you want to buy a house, you have to understand all of the things like your state tax code and how your country's running and all that stuff. You have to be those kinds of people, right? So to think they're going to get that kind of general education and then think that's going to be helpful for them through music, it's kind of difficult to sell that to people. It's kind of difficult to make people desire that, especially with it being so risky. So in my opinion, this is also why you'll see a lot of musicians turn to teaching, because they'll then see where their money went and then understand where the money goes. So then they'll do that to make money, and it just creates this cycle. But when you guys define musicians, you guys don't define them as music teachers, right? When you think of Taylor Swift, you don't think of her as a teacher. But when you think of any other greatest musicians in the world, you don't think of them as teachers. So that's kind of the disconnect that I'm seeing here. So let us move on, and then we will continue on with the next topic here. And like I said in the chat, make sure you guys are letting me know how you would design or define an artist today, like a young musician, like a single digit age, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old who can play the piano or sing really well. Like, how would you really educate them and inform them on the things they need to know going forward into, let's say, the teen schooling years, high school years, college years, and really get them on the right path? Because we can understand that for, let's say, a football kid. Like, if you play a football all your life, we like, oh yeah, he can play, he can throw the ball, yeah, he tall, he can fight. It's easy to figure that part out, right? But when it comes to musicians, it's a little bit tougher, because most of you know what comes with the NFL. Most of you know what comes with being a little football league coach, right? You don't really understand what comes with being a music teacher, and you definitely don't know what comes with being a entrepreneur / solo artist today, because of the huge disconnect in information, right? And so that's what this channel is about. We're going to be bridging the gap between that so you guys can make money as musicians, as fans, and investors of the music industry. So moving on to our next topic of the day, we're going to get into it.
So let's get into what we are now talking about. First, we're going to look at what the Coogan law is all about, and then we'll look at the different updates. California Family Code section 6750 to 6753 for all my family lawyers who are on this call with us. So you should be aware of this as well. I know sometimes we think entertainment law doesn't necessarily intersect as much with family law, but it certainly does. So
how many of you actually know what the Coogan law is, or the Coogan Act? I'm sorry. Well, I'm going to explain what it is, but in a nutshell, it's basically a way to help protect child actors, and it's in California. So it's officially known as the California Child Actors Bill, and it's a landmark California statute designed to protect the financial earnings of child performers, right? And so when we're talking about the price of school, price of college, the child could be earning money now at a young age to help pay for their schooling so that they're not in debt. But we got to understand how it works so that way it actually works properly for the child and properly for the family, right? Because we want to help make and design and support really strong and smart musicians, especially at a young age. So let's continue learning about it. So it says that passage of the law was prompted by the experience of Jackie Coogan, a famous 1920s child star discovered by Charlie Chaplin. As a child, Coogan earned millions of dollars in the 20s. But when he turned 21, he discovered that his mother and stepfather had spent nearly all of his earnings, leaving him with almost nothing. The law has been updated over the decades to ensure child performers are protected, and it centers on a few key provisions. So, before we move on learning more about those provisions, I want you to think about this too. Again, thinking about what we view musicians as, right? We spoke about how they are basically trying to, I would say, price gouge a lot of the education that musicians are asking for when it comes to college. Why do you think the parents would view the money that way? Why would they think that the money that that child was earning through the works, even through their support, was meant to be spent that way? Why did it take for a law to have happened, right? Now, mind you, it's the 20s. A lot of kids were working. I'm not gonna be honest with you. Like there were a lot of kids working before then. It was just normal, right? But the point is that the value of the money, why did they view it that way, right? For them to have made so much money and then for him to have been so young and then for the let's say the amount of money that they make. Why do you think they, missed that mark there? But it says that the Coogan account, the core of the law requires a child actor's employer to deposit 15% of the child's gross earnings into a blocked trust fund, commonly referred to as a Coogan account. These funds are legally the sole property of the minor, and they cannot be touched by the parents, guardians, or managers. The money remains locked until the child turns 18 or is legally emancipated. So, this is probably how, because this is a pretty old bill, it's about 100 years old. Probably this is how a lot of child stars come out of, let's say, the industry making a good amount of money, or at least starting out with a good amount of money, right? So ideally, you'd be making 50% of your gross earnings, right, in a trust fund, right? So by the time you turn 18, it should have, a good chunk of change in there that you can then invest into yourself, right? So you could see things like a young person coming out and you ever seen like those young YouTubers, they come out and they just, for some reason, just doing well and things like that, a little well off than others. Well, it's because their parents actually technically, legally had them working for their money at a young age, right? And so for you, you're banking on your parents giving you money. You're banking on going and getting a McDonald's job. You're banking on hustling or investing or hoping, right? But there are ways as a young musician and artist to actually make money for yourself, and you're actually protected by law, so that way you come out of it right. On top of the other ways that you can make money for yourself as a young musician. So building wealth for yourself is easy to do, but again, it's all about how you view the money, right? This is why they say you can keep it for yourself, your parents can't touch it, and all that stuff, right? But you also have to understand how to make the money. That's going to be the key thing, right? The next part is that historically, a minor's earnings legally belonged to their parents under common law. But the Coogan Act explicitly changed this rule for the entertainment industry, establishing that the money a child earns from a creative contract belongs entirely to the child. To ensure contracts are fair and the trust account is properly set up, the law requires contracts for minors to be approved by a court. Furthermore, to maintain a valid work permit in California, the child's parents must provide proof that the Coogan account has been established within a specific time frame after signing a contract. So now that you guys understand a little bit how it goes in California, it also says that while the original Coogan Act is a California state law, it sets the standard for the entertainment industry nationwide. Several other states with major production hubs, such as New York, Illinois, Louisiana, and New Mexico, have enacted similar legislation to ensure young performers are financially protected. Okay. And so a
When a
lot of this is
minor
going to be new
provides
to you.
artistic or creative services, a portion of their gross earnings must be preserved in a block trust account, a Coogan account. And for all you lawyers watching this with the state bar updates that you probably all received with respect to how to handle client trust accounts, even if you've not delved in this area of the law, the concept should be familiar to you in terms of just making sure you have preserve a block trust account. So what are the key requirements? You're getting 15% of gross earnings that must be set aside. Entertainment lawyers, you know, we're always negotiating, dealing with, is it net or is it gross? So 15% of gross earnings must be set aside. Funds are the child's property, not the parents'. And it applies regardless of the parental intent or the family agreement. So what Coogan has always regulated is money. We're not going to get into the details of your morality or your fame or working conditions with respect to your children. But what we are going to say, looking at it from the Coogan law perspective, is, look, there's got to be accountability for the money that that child earns. So let's go into the update. What's happening with the Coogan law update? What's changed? And what has changed is not necessarily the statute's text overall, but how it's understood and applied. That's where you have Family Code Section 6752 come into play. Artistic and creative services are no longer limited to studios or traditional media.
Ooh. So, why do you think they had to stop adding or stop limiting it to studios and traditional media? What do you think is the reason for that, right? If it was a law since the 1920s and they said studios and traditional media are the ones that are affected by this, what would make you think that they would now not have that limitation anymore and then open it and make it a little more broader? Well, I'll tell you, little baby bird. The thing is that when COVID happened, a lot of people wanted to be streamers all of a sudden. Uh-oh. So that means that you can't just put your kid on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube, and just have them just playing video games and opening toy boxes all day, making ad revenue and not paying your child. You can't do that anymore.
And gross earnings include digital monetization, such as your sponsored social media posts, which I was talking about. Most of you should be familiar with that. If you get on Instagram and you see maybe a celebrity or influencer, and they have a product that they're advertising, you'll see at the bottom of that hashtag, sponsored ad, etc., per FTC requirements. So sponsored social media posts, your brand deals, your platform-based revenue, ads, subscription, affiliate income. So it's now expanded where it's no longer limited to the studios or traditional media. So what does that mean in plain English? That means the medium does not control. The function is what controls. All right, let's transition and look at why the Coogan update that we have now has a little more teeth. Number one, statutory mandate. Its enforceable trust obligation remains the same. And secondly, it's not platform dependent. And there's no exemption if you're creating this content, putting it on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. And the overall rule is digital does not equal informal and does not equal any sort of exemption that you get for purpose of the YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram.
Okay, so it's similar to how I've been telling you guys about how, as much as people don't like having personal brands, that you automatically have a personal brand when you log into social media. Like, the concept that you're online hanging out with your friends live streaming is not a real thing anymore. The internet is a real thing now. And so if you want to consider, let's say, just posting your kids online and having them dance to videos and stuff like that, that's one thing, right? You're just hanging out with your family online. But the minute you start making money, this has changed now, right? And for most of you, it does. It becomes like, now I'm not posting for fun anymore. Now I'm trying to figure out how to go viral, or I went viral and I really enjoyed that moment. I want to do it again or whatever, right? But the point is that the only reason you went viral is because you pinged what this quote unquote algorithm wanted to ping. And it's usually to get the algorithm uh, money from the advertisements that are on whatever social media platform you're on, right? But again, you know that because you signed the terms of service, right? Which essentially puts you in one of two categories. Either you're the person that's on the platform that's giving attention to the app for ad revenue, or you're the person that's creating for the app for ad revenue. And a lot of people struggle with differentiating the two if they post a lot. They struggle with that if they live stream a lot. And it's a conversation that if you have it with them, it's always a struggle because they have to now rethink what they're doing. So this is what I mean. If you're going to be live streaming, if you're going to be doing anything and you're not strictly trying to monetize it, you're wasting your time. You are literally just playing around making the platform money. But when I say that, it's hard to understand that because you were thinking that for whatever sentimental reason you have with your content, that it's gonna become something later. But what I'm trying to prove to you is that without things like this trust account here, or without things like an investment into education, you're truly not doing anything, right? So in order to be laser focused, you have to pull back a lot of the layers as far as, well, I have a lot of followers, or I'm always online, or these people really leave comments or are always in my little group chat and I'm always texting them. When you keep doing that and it keeps consistently not making you more money, then you have to realize that you have to change. And that's the part that makes artists really frustrated, right? And so what she's showing is that you can have a situation where you're posting online and things like that, and there's a sentiment that because it's digital, it's not formal. Well, now that's not the case anymore. Now, when you post online, that is a formal post of your quote unquote personal brand, right? And it goes from, like, this is just talking about the Coogan thing, but it can goes from if you're at a job, if you're, joining an organization or something like that. This is all considered things you're like how, for example, if somebody posts something embarrassing on Twitter or Facebook or even uploads it on YouTube, you guys go through this whole process of like, so you mean to tell me you looked at that, you edited it, and then you hit post and you don't understand why? And then when I come along, I say, well, no, because most of you don't think that far. Most of you will just turn the phone on and just hit post. It almost baffles people to hear this because it's like, no, there's no way. I would never do it, but that's not the case. The case is that most people don't view being online, posting online, live streaming, being in group chats, and just being on the internet as formal. They don't view that as a true detriment to their time, detriment to what their productivity could be and things like that. And so that disconnect created a loophole for a lot of parents that didn't think that, well, if I post my kid online and they're just, making some money on the side, I can just use that money. It's mine and, through common law, right? But the issue is that would be you just happening upon some money, right? But that's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is people starting YouTube channels, starting businesses. These kids have personas, the parents have personas, there's logos, there's group chats, there's kind of a brand going on, right? That's more of a brand than anything.
All right, let's transition to yet another statute we're looking at, or a recent law that's passed, and that's the Child Content Creator Rights Act, Senate Bill 764. Which expands Coogan's protections. I think it's always important to look at what a statute does and what it doesn't to make sure there's clarity and no confusion. So what does this law do? It recognizes minors in monetized online content. And it also imposes trust, compensation, record keeping, and enforcement duties, even in informal influencer context. So if you're hey, I'm just doing this for fun and just putting it on YouTube, no big deal, this requirement still applies. It also reinforces, very important key here, that parents are fiduciaries. They're not owners of those earnings. And that's obviously very important for that child that's put in so much labor, if you will, and has nothing to show for it, like the Jackie Coogan case that we discussed. So what it does not do, it does not replace the Coogan trust requirements. You still have to comply with that. And it doesn't create identical enforcement mechanisms as well. And so essentially it's expanding the definition of covered performers to include minors in paid online content contracts. and also extends overall the classic Coogan protections to digital labor. All right, so let's look at the next statute to talk about. That's AB 1880. That also expands Coogan protections, and this also clarifies how earnings must be calculated and allocated when you have a content that is family run and revenue that's pooled or indirect. It's
Okay, so she's about to explain how they're supposed to organize the earnings that you get, right? But before we get into that, I do want to kind of consider, like, when they talk about digital content creators, how many of you think doing a podcast is hard work? Let me know in the chat. How many of you think creating, let's say, short form content or long form content is hard work, meaning difficult to do, right? Now, I want you to consider whether you thought it was difficult or not, that there's a child now doing it, right? Should the child be compensated on the difficulty of work, the effort of work, the hours worked? How would you value the labor of, let's say, a child actor or a child content creator, right? And it could be something as simple as, like, maybe they just set up a cool little streaming setup and they just play video games for content, or maybe they do something a little more practical, like maybe they do science experiments or play with toys or review toys or something like that. We've seen people do that. But how do you value the labor that they do, or do you value it? A lot of parents don't. A lot of parents just think they're just playing on camera and it's not real work.
sports enforcement, where digital income was previously obscured or mischaracterized. What both bills I've just discussed do not do is, again, they do not replace the Coogan law. Pay attention to those nuances, especially when you're reviewing or talking with your client or negotiating those deals or drafting it. They do not reduce trust account obligations, and they do not excuse compliance because income is new or platform based. So let's look at the visuals of side by side what all of this laws look like. Coogan, so issue who's covered, Coogan law, minor performing artistic or creative services, AB 1880. The minor as digital content creator under contract, SB 764, minors featured and monetized online content. Is contract required? Coogan law, absolutely. AB 1880, absolutely. Senate Bill 764, no. The core rule, Coogan law, 15% of your gross earnings in Coogan Trust account. AB 1880 has the same 15% rule that applies to digital earnings. And with respect to Senate Bill 764, your child must be compensated and earnings preserved. Who sets it up? That's always important. I talked about my own experience when I started. With respect to Coogan law, again, looking at the fashion modeling industry, for example, the employer is responsible for making sure that's set up. And if there's no employer, the parent will set that up as well.
So that's actually really important to understand for young musicians, because just like how record labels will step back if you understand a little bit of the vocabulary and language they're using, because they have to approach you with the fact that you understand what they're saying, children have the same leverage, right? Children have the same opportunity there, but the issue is that if this information isn't up front, then a lot of them will miss this. And usually, if they're under the leadership of their parents, and that means that the parents have to be the kinds of people to do this, right? And so going back to what we talked about in the first clip, the cost of an elite musician's training, and then considering the cost of being an elite musician, it'll have to be some kind of like correlation between the character you have and then the passion you have for the actual musicianship that you're trying to earn. Because a lot of the times when parents are doing this kind of thing, it usually means that there are a disconnect between how they view their child as a content creator and then also how they view content creators, right? If you know they make a lot of money, but then you would position your child to be in one, then it would be kind of wise to pay your child for the work that they're doing, right? But it would, because how we view children and how we view the value of, let's say, their minds and their effort and their labor kind of changes when you start to consider what you're actually getting, right? So if you had to train a child to become a content creator, like teach them how to work webcams, how to make thumbnails, what and all this stuff, how to work computers and engineering and stuff like that, then how much would you pay then? How much would you pay for that? Knowing what people are knowing about the amount of money that's in content creation, as well as the risks, you know? So let's get into our last clip, and then we will get you guys off to lunch. Like I said, right on time, keeping it with business. But again, this whole week themed around the children and how they can actually be of supreme value to the music industry as long as we empower them through education. We got to make sure we understand the value that we see in them before we just start, putting them in school and just thinking like it's going to work. They have to actually be set up to win. We have to actually put them in position to win. And we understand this in most instances. Like if you want a little athlete, if you want to be a little athlete, then you got to really make sure you're healthy and you're making sure you're getting the right coaches and things like that. If you want to be a little doctor, you got to make sure you understand the right information, and also so you can withstand the work environment, right? We understand these things, right? So let's apply that same logic to musicians, right? And so let's get into our last topic here.
A major brain study just linked screen time before the age of 2 to higher anxiety at age 13. And in January of 2026, the American Academy of Pediatrics quietly changed their guidance on screen time. Now, these two things seem like they should contradict each other, but they don't. If you're a parent trying to figure out whether handing your kid an iPad for 15 minutes is actually ruining their brain, then, well, this is the video I wish somebody would have made for me. Because last week, for the sake of our sanity and all of those around us, we gave both of our sons their tablets while we were on a 2-hour flight. And I'll be honest, they played with them for most of the flight. And I don't know if I would describe what I felt as guilt, but I had some kind of weight on my chest the entire time because I've read and seen all the horror stories about screen time, and so have most parents. So I decided to do some digging when I saw that there were new guidelines. Here's what I found when I actually went through the research. So researchers in Singapore followed the same group of children for 13 years, from infancy to adolescence. They used brain imaging at multiple points along the way. And it was the most comprehensive longitudinal study on infant screen time ever conducted, and it's not even close. And what they found was pretty sobering. Children with high screen exposure before the age of 2 showed measurable changes in brain development. Specifically, the networks responsible for visual processing and cognitive control matured much faster than normal. Faster sounds good, but it's not. And I want to show you exactly why.
So how many of you think that that could be problematic for young musicians, right? Now, I'm tailoring it to musicians, but most people are going to try to correlate this to just like children in general. But when we think about musicians, there is a certain kind of, let's say, temperament you will need for certain situations when it comes to being a musician, right? And a lot of times the musicians that we expect are not trained that way, right? They're not necessarily looking at, let's say, patience, understanding, discipline. Like these are usually not the characteristics that we look for when we think of musicians. We usually think of like, oh, they're smart, they're weird, they're quirky, they're kind of like all over the place, right? But when you think about, let's say, a student that has to learn like jazz standards on a saxophone, like you have to now commit your body to this. Like you have to sit in the room, commit your breathing, your mind, your time, and sit and make sure it's correct. And then for most of us that are trying to really do this, record yourself, play back the music, absorb and critique yourself, and then be honest with the mistakes you make. Go back and repeat it again. Now, how many of you expect your child to do that today? How many of you expect your 16-year-old to do that today? 22-year-old who just got out of college to do that today? And that's the kind of dedication we expect of them, right? When I was asking you earlier, like, what is an elite class of musician and what does that really look like to you? So that's where we got to really ask ourselves, like, what are we really designing? What are we expecting for things like that? So let's see what the new information is out here. And it says here on my notes, it says the landscape of how experts view children's screen time has undergone a significant shift. The American Academy of Pediatrics, AAP, released updated guidelines that move away from strict, rigid hourly limits for older kids, reframing the conversation from screen time to navigating a complex digital ecosystem. The core message from pediatricians is now balance, content quality, and context over simply counting hours. While the rigid approach has softened for school-aged kids, the foundational guidelines for early childhood development remain precise. Avoid all screen use completely, with the sole exception of interactive video chatting with family under adult supervision. So that is for children under 18 months. Children 18 to 24 months, if introducing media, it should be high quality educational programs such as PBS Kids, Sesame Workshop, and must be viewed alongside a caregiver or parent to help them understand what they are seeing. For ages 2 years old to 5 years old, limit non-educational screen time to 1 hour per weekday and up to 2 to 3 hours on weekend days. And then it has to be high quality, non-violent, child-centered content. Now, I wonder why they added non-violent in there, because when you think about violence for children, a lot of times it looks like, let's say, Ren and Stimpy, Courage the Cowardly Dog. A lot of superhero shows today have, like, some gunfire, some fist fighting and stuff like that, right? But there's really got to be a reason as to why they want you to keep it down to 1 hour a day. Just 60 minutes a day on the entire screen time, right? And then they also tell you it has to be high quality. So whatever the quality of the content is for 60 minutes, and then it can't be violent and it has to be child-centered, right? That's extremely niche content that takes a lot of precision thinking for most parents. Most parents aren't this consistent, which is why I'm laying it out this way, because a lot of people will look at, let's say, the $90,000 college tuition for an education and assume that their child can do this. And they also assume that they're the parent that can facilitate a child that can do this. And that's not the case for most parents. Most parents will look at this list and be like, oh, this is a cool little guideline, but they will not stick to this, right? And this is where the difference between elite musicianship goes from elite musicianship down to just some average Joe with a guitar, right? So that's the difference. And it's not a direct correlation between like the 60-minute hour time. It's just the understanding of the information. That's all it is, right? And so for 6 years and older, rather than universal hour cutoff, the AAP recommends setting customized, consistent boundaries that prevent screens from crowding out essential daily routines like sleep, physical activity, and face-to-face family interaction. So if your kid's waking up early in the morning, there's a daily routine thing that people always talk about, right? And after your daily routine, there's usually like some chores and there's usually some schoolwork to be done. And usually after that, you probably want to get some fitness in and stuff like that, and maybe some education. And again, this is ideally what most people say they want for their children, right? But in practice, you have to do this every single day to train the child in order to do this without you, right? And if you aren't the parent to do this every single day, then you will be setting your kid up with the expectation of whatever outcome you give it, right? And again, it's not a good or bad thing. It's just a matter of, okay, if you want your kid to be an elite musician and go to school, what are you training them to do? But then on the other hand, if you want them to just be just some regular guy or just some regular girl with their own sensibilities, who's probably just going to be a regular normal fuck up like all of us, right? Then that's what you'll get. But the point here is that there's an expectation on children that has to correlate with what we actually give them responsibility for, right? So if you want to be a parent that has a very, very responsible, disciplined child that respects manners, then you also have to be the parent to facilitate that and also keep that standard every single day, right? The minute you waver, you'll have a child that wavers, and they'll be a reflection of you, right? And so a lot of times when we point this out, we have to really be clear, especially when it comes to musicians, because then when the musicians are like, getting awards on stage, and then you be like, man, I wonder why I don't agree with none of their personal life. It's because, well, a lot of their personal life probably would not align with, let's say, your characteristics or things like that. But on the other hand, if you see a musician strung out on drugs or signing bad deals and stuff like that, and you're sitting there like, man, I wonder why he doesn't know better. I wonder why he's not doing better. Well, it's because of how he was raised, right? And it's not, like I said, in my opinion, a good or bad thing. It's just something we need to observe, especially if we want to start pushing children towards musicianship, or as a parent, you want to start spending money on your child being in musicianship. So here's the big shifts in the new guidelines, right? Experts are warning parents to look out for apps and games engineered with endless scrolls, constant pop-up rewards, and aggressive targeted advertising. These designs are built explicitly to keep a child's brain hooked, hindering their ability to step away from the device without a struggle. High quality content should encourage critical thinking or social connection rather than passive, infinite consumption. So can you guys tell me in the chat, what is passive infinite consumption content? What kind of content do you think you would make that would just cause endless scrolling, constant pop-up rewards, and aggressive targeted advertising? What kind of content is that? And I can guess that a lot of you would think this only affects children too. But when you considering this, this is what people would colloquially call doom scrolling. And doom scrolling is such an apt word because it actually is something that makes most people just sit still and rot, right? And we say rot it's again colloquial, but the point is that you're not doing anything, right? Chat says YouTube. Yes, YouTube is pretty much designed to constantly keep you hooked. The point in an algorithm is that it now shapes your tastes, so then you almost have to stay on the app, because if you leave, you won't get that feeling again. So now imagine doing that for a 5-year-old child or a 2-year-old child or even like a 13-year-old, and you're trying to really just consume, and it's designed for you to do that, right? Now let's move away from music and technology for a second. This correlation right here, most people would understand when it comes to food. If we move to the right over here and we start talking about like the chemicals they put in food to make it more addictive and why you still have body fat and stuff like that and why you feel tired all the time, we get it there. Now let's move it back to screens. If we start putting screens in front of children in single-digit ages, and we know that the content that is in front of them is tailored for these specific outcomes, then what kind of outcomes are we expecting of the children, right? And this goes into all kinds of things, like how you raise children, the culture, and then bleeds into, honestly, how you view your child's brain, how you view your child's expectations and responsibilities when they have to use that brain on their own without you, right? So if I, for example, gave you a trumpet, and I was like, yo, this trumpet is really nice and it's clean, it's perfect, it's nice, right? And you played it, it sounds great. And I'm like, you can keep that trumpet, that's all yours. Take it with you and do whatever you want with the world, right? And then in another world, I gave you a trumpet and it's like dirty, dingy, it's bent up, it got dings all over it, and you can't find the mouthpiece and some of the valves are missing. And I'm like, yeah, take that with you and do whatever you can with the world. The world is your oyster. You're going to be great one day. Which trumpet would you prefer, right? And it's a conversation about how you really want to raise your child, but also, again, how you view your child. Like, I just wouldn't give nobody that trumpet, right? I wouldn't be pursuing any kind of like real reason to give anybody that trumpet. Personally, I wouldn't, right? And so once you start answering that question, then you can look at this information and be like, okay, well, dang, if I wanted to get into music, how would I approach this? If I wanted to be a musician and, let's say, be a producer, how would I approach this? That's why for the past like month, I've been showing you guys the technology side, the economic side, the political side of being a musician, because a lot of you know just what Drake and Kendrick be talking about. Y'all don't understand nothing about anything else, right? And so if you don't know that, that's the dirty trumpet. The clean trumpet is the one that understands that there's gunk in the lead valve, and then you got to put valve oil back in, and you want to check the pearls on the valves and things like that. You want to check for dents and make sure the brass is still good and things like that. That's a completely different conversation than trying to just talk about, you know, what Kendrick and Drake is talking about all day, dirty trumpet shit, right? So a major focus of recent pediatric research is the bidirectional link between media and emotional regulation. Using a tablet or phone to soothe a child during a tantrum or a period of intense boredom can displace critical opportunities for them to develop internal coping mechanisms. Experts urge finding offline strategies for emotional regulation. So what that really means is like, I've actually heard an old person say this one time, and they were saying it's good to be bored. Like I was just standing bored at work, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm just bored, just doing it." I was like, "That's good. You should be bored, because then, you're safe. Like if you're bored, you're safe. Like you're fine in life. You're winning, right? That's one thing. But if you're also bored, you can now have an opportunity to be creative, which is why you want to have opportunities to alleviate the boredom that is still going to be like beneficial. So some people, when they're bored, they just take a nap. There's like, if I got nothing to do, let's just fast forward the clock, right? Some people, they eat when they're bored. So the problem there is you want to have something good to eat. Some people watch movies when they're bored. The problem there is you want to have good movies to watch. Some people play video games, but the problem there is you want to be able to get on and off the video game and play games that are actually going to make you feel good and not stress you out, while you're bored and shit like that. So these internal mechanisms, they're saying for kids, they don't have them. They haven't figured out what they are. They don't have a book for naming them. You can't say, hey, calm down. And they just go, oh, okay. And just calm down. They don't know how to do that, right? So you have to train them every single day. You have to be like, okay, you're bored again. Do something about it. Like you can't just turn that opportunity off for them, right? And they have to be trained through that from single digit age all the way into their 20s, because imagine being that musician that has to learn jazz standards on a saxophone. You're going to be bored. You're going to be in situations where if you don't discipline yourself to sit here in this room and figure this out, or at least learn how to balance between sitting in this room and getting some yoga done or keeping yourself from going insane to where you can make this $90,000 music tuition make sense, then you're setting your child up for failure in the terms of they're just going to be in debt and not really understand how to utilize their education. You can pay $90,000 to get into school, but you got to also be able to utilize the education you get. Some of us drop out of school and can still use the education we get. So it's like, it's going to come down to the characteristics and the training that the child has. And we want to get this stuff early, especially if we want to design what we call elite class musicians. And that's what we're doing here at this channel. This channel is really for musicians to understand that there is way more for you to be thinking about than how to make beats and how to be the cool rapper or how to be a cute singing girl that can twerk, right? If you really want to take advantage of this, this is something that you could honestly set up for other musicians. Like I said, most of you turn to being teachers, but this is something that teachers could use and understand as well to help develop a better culture of musicians. But I'm getting too in the weeds. I'm getting all nerded out. Let's continue talking about this. So instead of obsessing over the clock, the AAP encourages parents to ask, what is the screen crowding out? If a child is getting 9 to 11 hours of sleep, playing actively, finishing their responsibilities, and engaging with the family, their media use is likely in a healthy balance. To naturally manage boundaries and foster communication, pediatricians recommend delaying personal smartphones and tablets, utilizing a shared family tablet, or keeping gaming systems in common areas automatically encourages co-viewing, which means you can keep an eye on what they're playing and what they're watching and who they're talking to. Makes content monitoring seamless. Again, you can keep an eye on your child because that's what you're supposed to do. And prevents isolated, unchecked scrolling, right? So there's also a thing that I talked about before here on this channel. You can go find it. It's called media molestation. And basically it's the idea that you can just show anybody anything you want ever and they should be fine with it. But in reality, you're actually affecting how they view things and how their mind works, right? And so if you think about that, there's actually a lot of times where if you talk about like the cyber crimes of Snapchat and Discord, where the predators a lot of times isolate the children from their parents or from their siblings and things like that, so they can have unmitigated conversations with the child. Now, that is a situation that you want to be in control of as a parent, obviously, but it also leads you to think about the other things, like how your child would deal with that situation being one of those children, because we honestly, in reality, can't be there all the time and then swat their hand away from danger. So this is why training them every single day is going to be key, because if they're not smart enough to understand this, or at least witty enough to notice these kinds of problems for themselves, then like the information here is saying their internal coping mechanisms will not trigger. They're not going to know, oh man, I've been on this game for like an hour. Let me go ahead and knock out something else. They don't have that. As much as we will expect them to, as much as we will chastise them to, you probably have whooped your kid for saying, why are you always on the game? It's because they can't think of another reason. We had here also on this channel a video from Rollo Tomasi. I'll probably pull it up in another stream later this week, where he was talking about how a lot of people are turning to I want to say sedation, he called it, where people are turning to video games and streaming, and people are turning to Netflix and things like that. And then, of course, drugs and relationships to kind of like numb out all of the things they really want to work on, right? And so that's why it's important to understand this, because you may be sending your kid to a $90,000 tuition or $80,000 tuition situation to be a musician, but they're falling victim to all the training you gave them when they were 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, and they're going to use that to their advantage as much as they can, which won't be much of an advantage because it's not anything valuable to them, right? So here are actually some of the steps most people actually are doing out there, and then we'll continue going back to the video here. So establish tech-free zones. Keep bedrooms and family meal times completely device-free. 1 hour of bedtime cutoff. Turn off all screens 30 to 60 minutes before bed to protect the natural production of melatonin and ensure deep restorative sleep. How many of your kids are having trouble like going to sleep or even staying asleep, or then like when they get up in the morning? This was my problem when I was a kid. Getting up in the morning and still being tired is because I went to bed late. That was usually the thing, right? So there's actually a biological process to going to sleep. You can't just turn the lights off and say, oh, it's 9 o'clock, go to bed, and your kid's going to do that, right? Your kid needs to have some kind of calming down. If they're arguing and they're crying and screaming, it's just not, you're not comfortable. Clearly, nobody's going to go to bed like you wouldn't go to bed like that. Like if you were upset, angry, crying, and throwing a temper tantrum, slamming doors and stomping your feet, and somebody said, all right, now go to bed and shut the lights off, it'd take you a good 30-40 minutes before you calm back down and your body regulated itself, right? So we understand that, but we got to also apply that when we're trying to deal with this kind of situation, right? And then at last it says use collaborative tools like the free interactive builder on the AAP's Healthy Children website to establish predictable, transparent routines that the entire family, including parents, can model consistently. And that's all pretty much most kids are going to need, is just consistent modeling. Most of the time we have balanced lifestyles, but if you don't, you have to know that you don't. And that's the key thing about this channel, is I'm trying to teach you guys how to learn by, if I show you information and you're like, man, I never thought of it this way, well, now you got to apply it and then see if it really works for you.
Think of brain development like building with blocks. The goal isn't to get really tall really fast. It's to build a solid foundation that can handle complexity. When brain networks specialize too quickly, when you rush the build, they lock into place before they've actually developed the flexible connections needed for complex thinking. The foundation is rushed, and that shows up years later in kids. By age 8, these kids took longer to make decisions on cognitive tasks. I think it was by age 13, they reported higher levels of anxiety. Why am I telling you all of this before I tell you what the AAP changed? And we will get into that, I promise, just stick around. But the reason is that it's important to understand the foundational impacts of what these researchers discovered so that you can then understand what these AAP guidelines and changes actually mean. So
a big part of this too is that you can't retroactively reverse these things too. Like there was a big thing about when COVID happened, a lot of kids were, I would say, I think the word they were using was traumatized, but it was really like they were trying to figure out what to do, because they're like, their whole lives were shook up in terms of like you went from a normal life to suddenly you can't graduate, normal school is on the computer, everything's different, right? And so for them, they have to kind of rethink like what that was. They have to like deal with that, and they can't retroactively just be like, yeah, that's fine, just chill out. Before that, it was my generation where we had, at least here in the United States, we had 9/11. There was a big shift in like how people communicated with each other. There was a big shift in how people were doing things and stuff like that. And so for a lot of kids, it was like, do we just move on with that information and with that experience? Before that situation, after that situation, 9/11, they had the 2008 housing market crash. And so a lot of kids families got, picked up and moved and things like that. You had things like Hurricane Katrina. We recently had a big hurricane down here in the Carolinas. Like there's a lot of different things that you just can't take it back for kids. Like that was just a part of their lives, right? So something that we can control, like screen time, I think we can take a little bit more initiative. Like you're not going to be able to stop like you going broke, or something like that. And as far as like, just out of your control. Like let's say you get like a weird diagnosis or something. But I mean, like if you're in a situation where you're like, man, I have a normal child and I have potential here and I can do almost anything I would need to do for this child's benefit. It would really benefit you to take 100% initiative in that for just the sake of the child, right? Because there's really no point not to, for you to just do it because you're comfortable, like the information was saying, just to calm a tantrum or something like that. It's better to go through it with your child now than to wait till they're 22 trying to do it and you're trying to make sense with a grown-ass woman on why they can't do what they want to do and things like that. That's why in the movies you see them kids running away from home and stuff like that. It's because them parents weren't really active, at least in theory, with the kid from the beginning, right?
On January 27th of 2026, the AAP published updated guidance based on a comprehensive review of hundreds of studies spanning 2 decades of research. The headline that went around everywhere was that they are moving away from strict screen time limits. AAP is now saying that how parents have been thinking about screen time, such as counting minutes, setting timers, or feeling guilty when they go over that time, was the wrong framework. What matters isn't the clock, which it's still a portion of it, but it's 5 questions that they call the 5 C's: child, content, context, co-viewing, and crowding out. For child, how old is the child? What's their development stage? For content, what are they actually watching or doing? Is it passive or is it interactive?
How do you guys define passive or interactive content? Like, for example, this is by definition interactive content because you can interact with me in real time, right? But when you think of passive content, what would that be? I would say passive content would be content that you're not actively trying to think about. Like, it would be like if I'm trying to think of something I watch that might be passive. Like, let's say cooking videos. Cooking videos are pretty passive because I never really plan on making the recipes I'm watching. It's kind of like, oh, and like pretty to watch, or sometimes I want to learn a skill or technique and something like that. Yeah, a lot of times passive content is usually, I would say, determined by the person viewing it and how they're viewing it, right? Because some people are watching content just for fun, just because it's ASMR or just because the girl is cute or something like that. Someone said haul videos. Yeah, haul, like even like grocery haul videos where it's like, oh, look what I bought today. Unless you're a person that's like really into budgeting and shopping for the sake of like you're a shopper, there's really no reason to spend your time pointing your face at that screen, right? So in my opinion, passive would be like if you had me up right now on your screen while you're doing something else. That's passive content, right? You can turn me off and still do what you need to do. Other than that, you would be watching like content to say, okay, I want to actually like see what they're talking about. I want to learn this. Like I'm watching this. Like it's not passive. I think that would be the difference, but I wonder if I'm wrong in that.
Context. Is it bedtime? Is it during dinner? Is it in the car, on the plane?
Context. That's actually a pretty good one. That's one of the things I struggle with, especially in college and high school. It was like when social media and like YouTube and stuff was blowing up, it was like a lot of times you would find yourself just playing games late at night or, you know, first thing in the morning, you wanted to get on the internet. And it's like, I was trying to train myself to like, no, do more like physical things in the morning, like get the body moving and stuff like that.
Plain, because context changes everything. Co-viewing. Are you watching with them or are you talking about what's on the screen?
Sometimes when parents are having their kids watch content, it's the same content that the parents like. And that's where this co-viewing part can get iffy because a lot of parents don't differentiate what a child can process and what they can process because of, like I said, if we've all been through 9/11, we kind of just think, oh yeah, blowing up a building just looks normal. Like we don't consider that crazy. Like if you watch a John Wick movie with your 13-year-old son, you almost think like, yeah, watching 40 minutes of murder is like, like you'll be fine. And so the processing here happens a lot differently from individuals and it's usually culturally driven, right? Like me personally, I'm not like like when I watch a horror movie, I'm not into just watching all the violence and gore. I'm more into like the mystery and the story or like the lore of the monster and like trying to figure out if the good and bad is going to tussle and stuff like that. That's the more interesting part for me. But if I'm a person that doesn't necessarily care about that same content can just be processed a completely different way. Like maybe they love the theatrical side of it. Like how did they make the gore look and things like that. Or there's also another side where they actually do get pleasure out of the entertainment of seeing the violence, literally. And then if you can't walk that through with your child to say like, hey, what are you looking at? How do you feel about that? What are you seeing? Then for most parents, you really just exposing your kid to content. You just throwing content on there all the time. Yep. Somebody in the chat said there are kids at the playground that know poppy playtime. And yeah, and poppy playtime is kind of one of the things I used as an example in the media molestation video, meaning that there is a lot of content that is for adults designed to look like it's for kids, making it attractive to children, which then exposes children to adult context and content. So things like you would never think a child would understand certain crimes, wouldn't understand certain things, right? And you would think if they did understand that, how they were exposed to that may have been against their will or against their consent, right? But in reality, a lot of times because we give these kids tablets and because we don't watch the content with them, this is actually consensual watching of this content. And then again, like he's saying, if they're processing extreme violence, extreme horror, extreme themes and things like that in context without, let's say, the supervision of a parent, then they only have their understanding to do with that. Which again is also why predators like to isolate children, because if I can just get the child alone, expose them to something, and then they are left with their own thinking, then they're malleable to, let's say, thinking like me or thinking a certain way that may or may not align with their parents, right? And so considering all of this information, now imagine trying to teach a young musician, right? You're trying to get a young musician to figure out, okay, if I'm looking at, let's say, a Megan Thee Stallion, and you're a 9-year-old little girl who's into singing, and you look at a Megan Thee Stallion, as a parent, when you're co-viewing a Megan Thee Stallion, let's say concert, music video, even her Snapchat videos on your daughter's phone, what is your daughter really processing, right? And then on the reverse, if you have a 13-year-old young man that you're growing, and he looks at, let's say, I don't know who's really popular now, but like a random rapper, and he's got like gold jewels on and guns, and there's certain context and language and vernacular and vocabulary that this rapper is using in their lyrics alongside context. And you hear this music coming out of your child's speakers or into their headphones. What do you think there's happening? What kind of questions do you ask your child, right? And again, this is in the context of you trying to make a musician, right? But it does bleed into most parenting in general. Like if you wanted to build a young rapper musician and, you think there's some value in them being a rapper and having a rap catalog, well, what are you really showing them that's proving to be educational and not just passive content, like just things they enjoy?
Just watching it by themselves and crowding out. Is the screen time replacing sleep, physical play, or face-to-face conversation? The core thing that you need to understand right now, and this is a quote from the AAP, simply taking devices away or enforcing rigid rules can backfire for parents. So the AAP is now saying that quality matters more than quantity. But here's what most coverage missed. The 5 C's don't replace the hard limits for the youngest kids especially. If your child is under 2, the Singapore study that we just mentioned, it's so clear. That time window of birth to 2 years is the most sensitive window. And here's part of that Singapore study that I don't think I've seen in a headline anywhere, but in a related 2024 study from the same research team, they asked a simple question. Is there anything that can counteract brain changes associated with early screen exposure? So what did it say? Among children whose parents read to them frequently at the age of 3, the link between infant screen time and altered brain development was significantly weakened. These researchers believe that shared reading provides what screen just fundamentally can't, right? A back and forth engagement, more rich language exposure, and emotional attunement.
And a lot of that is something that we assume kids can just pick up on. Like it's not even like your fault. It's just like we just think, oh, the baby gonna just figure it out one day. Like I said, you just tell a crying baby calm down, and you think they just know what to do, right? But the point here is that there's usually certain cues and signals we give each other as humans that allow us to understand each other. Which is why when you're thinking about paying for like a $90,000 tuition, like what do you think you're really getting? Well, that's part of what you're getting. You're getting your opportunity to immerse yourself, to be next to elite musicians, to actually have a conversation with a professor versus actually just, sitting on a screen 1,300 miles away trying to emulate what you're hearing. Now you can actually see the facial expressions of people when you play a wrong note, or you can have a conversation and realize, oh, you really don't agree with me, but I'm in this room with you and we still have to collaborate, right? So these are different things that you have to train yourself to pick up on. But if you're not putting yourself in a position to do that, it's going to be super hard to do that. And like I said, most of you just think that's just going to happen with kids, and that's not how it works.
And that's the kind of interaction that builds the brain's capability for flexible thinking. And I know what you're thinking. Finding the time is the hard part. I know that we're busy, and we as dads are working with time confetti, right? These fragmented little pockets of time scattered throughout the day. But the research is very specific. Shared reading at the age of 3, just 20 minutes before bed, just having that back and forth, asking questions, that physical closeness between you and your kids. It's not nothing. It's the most evidence-backed intervention on this entire list.
And this is kind of like when we tell people to just drink 8 glasses of water, to sleep 8 hours, to make sure you're walking and things like that. These tiny, the standards are so low for as far as what you should be doing for your kids. So because they're so low, a lot of people they'll find their comfort level. Like he said 20 minutes, they'll be like, oh yeah, I'll do like 25. But just imagine how much more value you put into your kid if you can dedicate a day of reading. Just a day. It don't gotta be like nothing intensive or crazy. It's just like, for today, there's just no tech. All your entertainment is just gonna be reading and just hanging out and just being alive, Who knows what could happen, but in terms of your comfortability, would you be able to consistently do that for like 2-3 years and say you've done it and then consistently do it, right? That's the conversation I usually have with people when I talk about fitness. They'd be like, yeah, I track my food. And I'd be like, how long you track your food? And they'd be like, I tried it for like the summer. And it's like, well, you're not gonna see no results from that. You got to track your food for like 3 years. Like, you got to really commit to the lifestyle if you really want to see a change, right? And so this is one of those things. 20 minutes of reading a day, that's one thing, but can you commit to it? And then how long are you going to do it, right?
And the tablets that I had my kids playing with on the entire plane ride last week matter less than what happened after we got off the plane. Whether I, as the adult in the room, put my phone down too, and if we read together that night and spent more time bonding and talking about things and just watching more screens. That's the science, and it's actually hopeful. Now, there is one thing that both the AAP guidance and the Singapore study agree on that I think we are starting to talk about more, but I don't feel like it's talked about enough. The AAP's new guidance explicitly calls out tech companies and policymakers, not just parents, because most of what makes screens harmful to your children isn't under your control. Because, and I quote this from the research, today's digital world isn't just TV. It's an immersive ecosystem designed to keep kids engaged as long as possible.
Where did we say that on the channel? Didn't we say this about 2 weeks ago about musicians, about how you guys don't really know why you like your favorite musicians? You really don't understand what makes you attracted to the latest artist. Well, a lot of it is because you've been engulfed in their ecosystem of content, right? Maybe you've seen their pictures on Instagram to then lead you to a reel, to then lead you into them doing a collaborative skit with an Instagram comedian, to then lead you to go to their YouTube page, to then see a music video, and then now you're streaming their music, and then suddenly you're hearing about them on Twitter because they're beefing with another artist, and then they squashed it and now they're doing a collaborative thing, and now you're listening to the other artist and you're like, wow, I like their beats too, and then you're suddenly looking at their pictures because she's cute too, and then it just keeps going and going and going and going. You don't believe me? Well, then remember that one artist way back in the day, you used to love their music, you used to bump their shit every day, you had their CDs, you remember their t-shirts and all that stuff. You don't support them the same as much anymore. It's now the new girl, now it's the new guy, now it's the other person, right? And so a lot of you would think, oh no, I did that on purpose. I planned to do that for years. I was always going to drop my favorite artist when I was 7 and then pick them back up when they were 14. No, you didn't. The point here is that a lot of the content you interact with, a lot of the technology you interact with is designed to understand you. It's actually to understand your behaviors and things like that in order to utilize it to bring more products, right? So who else is the most vulnerable community of people that we can do this to? Children. And so if your child is left alone with my device that I designed in Taiwan with those chips, and then I can put my content on there, and then it's designed by me, in a way to where you're constantly going to be hooked. Kind of like when people talk about, how do I get 1 million subscribers on YouTube? And they tell you, well, your hook has to be great. You have to have a 30-second intro hook, right? And you have to have content that is engaging, and you don't want them to stop looking at the screen and things like that. Well, if we understand it there, then why wouldn't it work with children, right? Why wouldn't it work better, at least in a more impactful capacity with children, right? And so if we understand it there, and then we try to apply it to children, for some reason there's a disconnect in that, well, no, we should really just not treat it as quote unquote formal content and things like that, right? We should really treat this as kind of like, no, I think the kids will be fine. It's designed to calm them down. My kid always throws a tantrum, right? And so there's a disconnect usually there, but it's very consistent with what people have been saying about tech companies for the longest, is that they are designed for a completely different motivation than you would ever think, but yet they get to collaborate with almost everybody.
Autoplay, infinite scroll, algorithmic feeds, notifications engineered to trigger dopamine responses. Speaking of, make sure you hit.
You ever seen those social media notifications where it just looks like nothing, and then you open it up and it's like a recommended post from somebody you don't follow? Well, it's to get you back on the app, to get you scrolling again, to get 10 more minutes of your attention back on the app. Now you might be thinking, oh, that's nothing. I just be chilling. I'm not doom scrolling. It's just a little doom scrolling. I'm at it. Well, if you're doom scrolling while watching this and you hear me, or you doom scroll today, just remember this conversation, right? Because what then happens is that same notification that was sent to you is also sent to hundreds of thousands of other people, that then all of you now then log back on into the app and then give them back more money. Now, I could say that's a bad thing, right? But you guys really, really want to do this. You really, 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 really would fight me if I told you should not do that. You should put the phone down. And for some of you, it really would help if you deleted your Instagram or Facebook or something like that, right? So now when we talk about this, personal branding, and then the expectations of people like yourself who are also watching this content on, let's say, entertainers and artists to capture this attention, then you can see what it is that you're trying to sign children up when you say, I'm trying to get them into being an entertainer or being an artist and things like that. Your singing 22-year-old daughter of jazz music has to compete with the girl who can keep the attention of 100,000 people with the tweet. Okay, that is the same concept, and it only really functions because of how we view this technology together. So when they do this, the easiest way, or the easiest group to target this with, is children.
Hit that bell icon to get notified. No, I'm kidding. Please don't do that if you don't want to. These aren't bugs. They are features designed by some of the smartest people out there. And they are specifically optimized to maximize one thing: engagement time. And the AAP is now explicitly saying that families have been carrying a burden that they were never really meant to carry alone. And this is why governments are acting. Australia banned social media for anyone under 16. And over 30 US states now have phone-free school policies. Jonathan Haidt, whose book, The Anxious Generation, helped start this conversation, puts it pretty simply. We've overprotected children in the real world and underprotected them online. And here are the data points that just feel so wild to see. 60% of parents feel guilty about their child's screen time. Some studies bump that number up to 74%, even when the content is educational. We have become so worried about screens hurting our kids that the worry itself is hurting our kids and our own mental health. It's a vicious cycle. And I think for dads specifically, who are already navigating the tension between being a provider or being present, that guilt can feel disproportionately heavy. Because we are often not the ones who hand off the iPad to handle work or to get some quiet time after we've come home from work. And we're the ones who feel the most alone in that moment, because we have to deal with that guilt too. After going through all of this, the Singapore study, the new AAP guidance, the guilt data, here's the framework that I'm trying to use. I'm not saying this is good for everyone or that you have to follow what I'm doing. These aren't meant to be rules. These are just questions that I'm trying to run through in the moment. Number one, under two, hold the line. This is something my wife and I have done or tried to do. We weren't perfect at it, but I think the Singapore study is specific. This is a sensitive period in infancy, not 3, not age 4, but infancy. So up until age 2. Again, video calls I think are fine, but that passive screen exposure before age of 2 is the thing to really minimize. This one really hasn't changed and feels like a non-negotiable. Just do the best that you can. Number 2, run the 5 C's before you hand over the device. Child, content, context, co-viewing, crowding out. If you feel good about 3 of the 5, 4 of the 5 in the moment, you're making an informed decision and not just a convenient one. And I think that difference matters. Number 3, read together. I know this sounds like a PSA, and it's not meant to be one, but this is the one intervention that the team from Singapore found that actually buffered against early screen effects. Just grab those fragments of time that you can, spend them with your kids, read to them, even if it's just 5 to 10 minutes before bed, because it's the most evidence-backed thing that we found so far. Number 4, co-viewing changes the equation. When you watch something with your kid and talk to them about it, not at them, but with them, and engage in it, the neuroscience says that this is categorically different. And number 5, your guilt is not protecting your kids. This is the one that I want to say directly to dads or other parents out there. Stressed, guilty parents don't make better decisions about screens. We make worse ones, right? We're not failing our kids by letting them watch a show while we make dinner or do the dishes. I think we end up failing our kids if the stress of trying to live up to some perfect expectation makes us unavailable or kind of distant when we engage with our kids. I think it's important to give ourselves some grace and realize that this is the new normal, and just to be human and show up. Because here's what I keep coming back to. The screen time conversation has been framed wrong for a long time. So the fact that we as parents have been trying to work toward perfect just shows that perfect doesn't exist. Before, it was about control and parents controlling themselves, or parents trying to manage something that the AAP is even now admitting is bigger than any family was ever supposed to manage alone. And with that new guidance and what the new science says, control isn't the point. It never was. Connection is.
So I agree with a lot of what he's saying, and it's really a big point about, like, again, how we view our young musicians and how we really make the strategies and plans for them to be successful, right? And it comes down to a lot of what we were saying in the beginning about, well, you can put them in school, you can pay for the money, but at the end of the day, it's like, well, what are they really getting, right? What are they really doing with it, and how would they really utilize it? And the risky part, quote unquote, is that it's up to the child, right? And so you can put them in the training, you can put them in all of this other stuff, but if they don't understand the technology side of things, they don't understand their sensibility side, they're not taking care of their health, they're not doing all these other things, and we're really setting them up to just be in debt and confused about our expectations of them, right? So this was Musician Talks with DameSmiff, and this is actually going to start off this week's theme of the children, y'all, talking about the children. And so us young musicians and us, you know, I guess you can say novices and things like that, we get to learn from a foundational perspective on how it is we can look at success, right? So I want you guys to also send me some lists in the comments, or at least if you message me or DM me, of any legacy or legendary artists you want me to try and explore their beginnings, their historical start and stuff like that. But like I said, this is Musician Talks with DameSmiff.